Okay, there's a few people in the chat room. Hello, all right, we are live. Thanks everyone for joining. Keeping Karlsson 472 here with a very special guest, Michael Amato. This isn't the official intro, so we don't have to bring the full energy yet. But yeah, saying hi to the people watching live. How's it going, Mike?
It's doing well. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
I'm stoked. I know I dropped like a big list of stuff to talk about, but I know I'm excited to hear all your takes on it. I feel like I've done so many shows with Brian that I could sort of guess what his takes will be on a lot of them, so it's always fun to get something unique.
I know, right? Yeah, it was an extensive list, so
Yeah,
it's good.
but I'll be yeah, I'm sure we can get through it all, or if not, then we'll cut the most boring ones. But yeah, we've got the chat room here. I guess, Mike, if you wanted to join, like, you don't have to, but like that link that I tweeted that you retweeted, that you could go there to see like the live chat if you wanted to. But all right, so let me start the recording here. Recording on this computer. All right. So yeah, I guess I'll just get started here. Yeah, yes. Welcome everybody to another episode of Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by a guy who's barely standing after going up against McDavid, Giroux, and worst of all, Logan Couture last night in my cupful matchup. But I'm here to make a show. Don't worry. I'm your host, Dylan Dubrovsky, and with me, a very special guest. Brian couldn't make it today, but that's okay because I brought in a real ringer. He's the fantasy hockey editor. No, he's a what are you at Sportsnet? You're just a fantasy hockey writer.
Yeah, writer, analyst. I don't know.
Oh,
that works.
He's a fantasy hockey analyst at Sportsnet. I know him very well as being the managing editor at Goalie Post, which is an amazing resource, and obviously goaliepost.com, and just an all-around amazing follow on Twitter at Amato_Mike. I guess I've just given up his name. It's Michael Amato. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks. I am excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller, so I am pretty stoked.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm a long-time reader, and I guess a short-time reader of your Sportsnet articles. I guess you just started that recently, but I love your 20 takes there. I may have pulled some of your like topics for this episode, so I might know some of your answers in advance.
That's great. It makes it easier. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we've got a lot to get to here. It's been a big week, and also like next week, there's barely any hockey. So it's a good chance for us all to reset on like what to expect, going into the All-Star break. So I'm really stoked to dive into everything. Of course, Keeping Karlsson proudly presented by DobberHockey.com. It's an amazing site. Goalie Post is part of Dobber Hockey, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're under that Dobber Hockey brand.
Yeah, so Goalie Post, Frozen Tools, the actual articles on Dobber Hockey. It's all there. So check it out, dobberhockey.com. But yeah, okay, let's get into it with some headlines to start off the show. And of course, the biggest headline of the week is Austin Matthews over in Toronto is going to miss a minimum of 3 weeks with a sprained knee. The Leafs didn't have a great start without him, losing 6-2 to Ottawa on Friday, but things seem to be going a bit better today. We're currently in the third period versus Washington, and Toronto is up 4-1. So maybe they just needed to work things out a little bit. In that first game, Pontus Holmberg, who's a player on the Leafs apparently, was on the line with Nylander and Kalle Järnkrok. They moved Marner back to the top line. Then today, and it seems to be doing much better, Alex Kerfoot has been on the line with Nylander and Järnkrok. I guess the obvious question is like, is Alex Kerfoot now someone that's interesting in fantasy, though he has no points so far in these four? And obviously, if he's not playing, on the top power play, I guess his opportunity is limited. But what are your thoughts on Alex Kerfoot?
Yeah, I always say about Kerfoot, like I feel like everybody growing up playing hockey had an Alex Kerfoot on their team, someone that was like tremendously talented, could skate like the wind, is always in the right place, but has about zero hockey sense and would not score if you gave him 100 chances or right in the slot. So I don't love Kerfoot for fantasy, to be honest. I know he did fairly well. Actually, I think he had 51 points playing with sort of Tavares and Nylander there on that second unit. But yeah, I don't really think he's going to provide you too much upside, especially if it's just him, Nylander, and Järnkrok. I think if he had two of the big four by his side, I think he would probably fare a lot better. But yeah, so far it doesn't seem to be affecting Nylander too much, the Matthews injury, which is good news because I think Nylander scored again today. So that's 2 goals in 2 games without him. And I think I heard on the broadcast he's got like 10 goals in 16 games without Austin Matthews. So he was the one I was most worried about at even strength, just because he's used to playing with one of those other three sort of big four forwards that they have, and now he's sort of by himself there on that second line. But yeah, so far so good for him. But yeah, I can't say living in Toronto and being a Leafs fan, I can't say watching Kerfoot the last few years that I'm super confident he's going to provide you much.
All right, so stay away from Kerfoot. And yeah, Nylander, he's kind of a little bit like a Kevin Fiala, right? And like I remember last year there was a stretch where Nylander went to the third line, and we were a little bit concerned on the podcast, but it's like he kept on doing fine. He's obviously on the top power play. So I guess Nylander should be fine. The Leafs overall, I mean, they're basically like guaranteed to play Tampa Bay in the playoffs. So they're probably just going to rest Matthews as long as they need to, which I guess is also good news for Michael Bunting, right? Because he's been jumping on the top power play. He was super cold, pointless in 4 going into today. I was going to ask you if you're worried about Michael Bunting, but I see that he beat me to it because he has a goal and an assist today versus Washington. So ending the pre-All-Star break. Or I guess there's one more game for Toronto next week before the All-Star break. But yeah, Bunting going again. I'm just going to assume you were going to say that you weren't worried about him. And also, by the way, Morgan Riley was pointless in 4, still hadn't scored a goal this year, and he has a goal today. So all my content, all my content for the episode is being taken away from me. So any thoughts on Bunting or Riley, or is like just congrats to anyone who's held on to these guys?
Yeah, it was a big day for people struggling. I mean, yeah, Morgan Riley needed a goal. That new contract. You can't be pushing February without scoring a goal. I know he's not like, that's not his super thing that he does. Is more of a guy that gets the puck out of the zone well, sets up a lot of plays. But yeah, you got to score a little bit, and I'm sure that felt good for him.
Yeah, and then I guess the last note on the Leafs, we got to go in net, right? Matt Murray was supposed to play Friday, got bumped last minute. The quote from Sheldon Keefe is that Matt Murray was dealing with something that flared that's been bothering him for a while, and that's why he couldn't play. So, never a good sign, especially for Matt Murray, that he's dealing with something that's been bothering for a while. So there's a lot of things that have been bothering him for a while. He's not backing up for the Leafs today. They called someone up. Samsonov is now playing his 7th start in a row. Do you think at this point, is it like Samsonov, we should just expect that he's going to be the volume guy in the second half? Like, who knows? Murray could come back, could not. He was even struggling when he was playing. How much hope do you have in Fleury being worth even holding in fantasy? Like, I know now people could stash him in their IR, but even if they couldn't, maybe it would be fine to just drop him at this point.
I think he's like venturing into droppable status. Like, I think Samsonov has kind of gained the trust of Keefe. I think he's probably going to start the bulk of the games. That being said, if you've sort of followed Samsonov the last few years, it's not like he's been sort of like rock solid for like full seasons. He's been sort of inconsistent too. So like, yeah, could I see a scenario later on in February or early March where like Murray's relevant again for a couple of weeks? Yeah, I could see that. But it's kind of getting into crunch time, right? You see, like you're down to a few more weeks before playoffs in a lot of leagues. So if you need the roster space, I think holding on to Murray, kind of hoping that he's gonna pull off some heroic magic for you come fantasy football time is a bit of a gamble. So I think if you need to drop him.
Yeah, it's a shame. We'll see how things work out in the playoffs for the Leafs, and I assume at this point Samsonov is the front runner to be their starting goalie, and hopefully they'll make it past Tampa Bay one time with him. We'll see if Murray is able to contribute anything. All right, let's move on to another team now. So another big injury. Pavel Buchnevich is on the IR after a minor ankle procedure. Rob Thomas also injured in St. Louis. So it's kind of hard to talk about the fantasy impact since it's possible that both of these guys will be back after the All-Star break. So probably not worth diving in too much into the impact of these guys being gone. Meanwhile, Vladimir Tarasenko returned from his injury and things haven't been going that well for him. He's pointless in 3 games. He played with Barbashev and Nola Chari in the loss on Saturday to Colorado. So maybe this is just a situation where Tarasenko is going to need like Buchnevich and Rob Thomas to come back just so we can have some better line mates and get going again. Like, would you be nervous with Tarasenko, or can you just assume that things will get better as soon as the reinforcements come in?
Yeah, I'd assume they'd get better. You think St. Louis too would try to, I mean, he feels like kind of a sure bet to get traded too, right? Like at the deadline. So you'd think the Blues would try and really, stock him with a lot of talent around him to boost his trade value like before the deadline. So I'm not too worried about him overall. I think when those guys come back, he's going to get some better lines. And yeah, you have sort of, I guess, kind of dangling of the carrot of if he goes to a better team, you hold on to him at the deadline. Maybe he lands in a really good spot for the fantasy playoffs and hopes there.
Oh, I see. So okay, we're assuming that Tarasenko's for sure going to go. I guess St. Louis is falling out of it
Well,
quickly.
yeah, I don't know if it's for sure, but I feel like out of all the names I've seen, like I've heard like O'Reilly could get traded, Barbashev, Tarasenko. I feel like Tarasenko, they've kind of had a bit of a rocky relationship with the team. I know he asked for a trade, sort of got rescinded. He's in a contract year. So I just look at the odds of him sort of re-signing as slim. So I figured they would try to deal him. But yeah, you never know. I mean, could, he could not move, but I'd assume if they're going to deal him, they probably want to prop him up as much as they can with some good line mates.
Yeah, well, then it becomes interesting. I guess that will be a discussion when we have our episodes around the trade deadline. And everyone always gets excited about a player that gets traded. Tarasenko's generally been in a pretty good spot in St. Louis, like with good line mates, not a good power play. But you'd assume a team trading for him. It's tricky because probably a team that's trading for him is a team that's already pretty good and just wants to bring in an extra piece if they're giving up picks and stuff. So maybe he wouldn't have such a prominent role. But also, it's hard to imagine a team acquiring Tarasenko and not putting him on the top power play. So I don't know. I guess it's hard to speculate on like if it'll benefit or hurt him if he gets traded until we find out where.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you would just be thinking like if whoever's trading for him is probably going to be a contender, right? Like a team that's pretty good or doing better than St. Louis this year. So he'd probably be in a more favorable spot overall. But yeah, I can't imagine a team bringing him in and not using him in a
All right. So also in St. Louis, Torrey Krug also returned along with Tarasenko. He's been a lot more impactful than Tarasenko has so far since his return. 3 assists in 3 games and 11 shots for Torrey Krug. I know you tweeted about how you were impressed with what you've been seeing from Krug so far. Right now, I think he actually probably benefits from Buchnevich and Rob Thomas being out just because St. Louis, when they're fully healthy, they kind of have 2 power plays that go kind of even, and Justin Falk gets like half the time. Now Torrey Krug is quarterbacking the clear stack top power play. So maybe it's like enjoy it for now, but maybe he'll go back to what he was doing before once everyone's healthy.
Yeah, see how long it lasts. He's definitely looking good since
Actually, sorry, Michael, do you mind if I just off the air? You kind of sound like you kind of keep going in and out of being like muffled and then like not muffled. Do you know if something's changing on your end?
No, not that I know of.
Oh, now it's good again. Okay, I
Okay.
don't know. Anyways, okay, sorry. Do you want to just let's just keep going. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, just like so I asked, do you think it's like what did I say? Is Krug gonna go back to how he was before once everyone's healthy?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes with Krug. I don't know if how long this run's gonna last. I think the thing interesting about him is when someone's been on the IR for that long. I know he was dropped in a lot of leagues, so sometimes you almost forget about him. I know he was sitting on the waiver wire in my league. Someone scooped him up the other day. So I think it's just the thing with him is if your league has plus minus, is probably a pretty big detriment. I think he's like minus 23 or something on the year. That's the only thing to watch for there. But yeah, I think while those guys are out, I would take advantage of it if you can, because he seems to be like shooting at a pretty high volume too, which is a little bit unusual.
Yeah, I guess with St. Louis is their goaltending has been very rocky, so that's not going to be good for anyone's plus minus. I don't know how much of the blame should go on Krug and how much of it should go on Binnington, but I guess it doesn't matter either way. He's the one who's hurting you in fantasy if your league counts plus minus. But as you know, like no one should really be using plus minus in their leagues because it's so unfair. It's not. It's more about the goalie than the player.
Oh, for sure. They definitely shouldn't, but yeah, I get questions about it all the time.
Yeah.
I think there are people that still out there using it for sure.
Yeah, well, this is our once in a while plea to people to we recommend your life will be more fun if you play at a league without plus minus. I
Get
think.
rid of plus minus. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a little less impactful injury, but still something to dive into here. Ilya Mikheyev is going to undergo ACL surgery and has been shut down for the season by the Canucks. He actually scored a goal in his final game, and he was on a good line playing with Besser and Horvat. So I guess now we're going to see all new lines, and already we've been watching for how the lines are going to shake out under new coach Rick Tocchet. And yeah, so now for sure there'll be a shakeup because Mikheyev is no longer there. What are your thoughts? Like, are you expecting anything to change in general for the Canucks? Like, is there any player that's been like cold that you think maybe now can heat up, or that's been hot that maybe is going to cool down? Like, what's your general take on what's going to happen to the Canucks moving forward?
Yeah, I think overall, like they might be a bit more like stingy defensively, and that's one thing like I loved about Bruce Boudreau for fantasy was like he was just very freewheeling offensive style. Maybe not always the best for results. Like I know they 6-5 games, and that's really good for fantasy. So I could see them, playing a little bit more tighter of a game and trying to, give up a little bit less and then probably sacrifice some offensive chances. But I don't know. I've kind of liked the way JT Miller's looked in the first couple of games under Tocchet. He's definitely been a little bit more balanced. Like he's filling a lot more of the categories for category coverage since Tocchet's taken over. And he's taking faceoffs again too, which is interesting. Probably the other one I would say is like Thatcher Demko. You know, like you sort of look at he struggled earlier this season under Boudreaux. I think like if they can get a little bit better defensively, obviously that's gonna help Demko. And if you remember last year, like Demko was really good on the Canucks were pretty bad last year, feeling on the head from the season, but Demko still managed to put up like I think it was a 915, and he had like a winning record. So like, I think he can still provide a lot of value. And if you kind of look at waiver wires right now in a lot of leagues, like they're pretty thin, right? They're pretty bare. So if you're someone like Demko, you want to take a chance on, like, he could probably give you something if everything kind of falls his way. He's got the talent and the highest ceiling probably sitting.
Yeah, I mean, Demko is definitely very interesting because, he was so great last year, so bad this year that you could probably get him for pretty cheap. Or like you're saying, maybe he's just sitting on people's waiver wires. Could blow you up. I wouldn't pay a big price for him, but because also coming back from injury is never too easy. But he's good. And like you brought up JT Miller. Yeah, I'm looking at his like most recent game versus Columbus: 2 assists, 7 shots, 3 hits, 8 faceoff wins. So yeah, if he can be like that, then that's the what made him so valuable, why he was drafted so high in drafts this year. He's approaching point per game now. He's up to 45 points in 49 games. So that's a 75 point pace. Last year he paced for over 100. What's your bet? Do you think Miller is going to pass the point per game threshold by the end of the season?
I think he'll be right around 80, give or take. So I think he could get there. Yeah, I think for me, like, I don't think his points were like, obviously, like if I think 100-point season that he had last year opposed to it was probably like going to be really hard to duplicate. So I'm not too surprised his points are down, but I think I was concerned, like, he obviously he was playing a lot of wing earlier in the year, so he wasn't taking faceoffs. I think his shot totals were down. There's other stats as well. So I think now that he's a bit more balanced under Tocchet, I think I've noticed him sort of filling up those categories more, and I think that's what you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the lines, Miller was playing with Garland and Dakota Joshua, which you would think is like not the best pair of line mates, but maybe like being able to play center now. And obviously the power play is a big part of his game.
Yeah, for sure. Like,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, sometimes maybe he just likes that more responsibility, kind of carrying his own line than kind of playing with some others. He's just a little bit more passive maybe in that scenario. Now he's maybe just a bit more of a driver. But I don't know.
No, it makes sense. Again, I'll bring up the Kevin Fiala, right? He seems to do so well when he's playing with the lesser caliber players. I guess since we're on the Canucks, I guess we got to give kudos to Quinn Hughes, who I believe on an episode like a month or two ago, Brian and I were like not joking, but like kind of like scoffing at how Quinn Hughes somehow still hadn't scored a goal, kind of like Morgan Riley. Actually, all of a sudden now Quinn Hughes has 4 goals in his last 10 games. Like, there's no way like Hughes is actually becoming a goal scorer now. I remember like going into the year, there was some like word that in the off season he was trying to like shoot more and kind of change the way he played a little bit. Is this like for real, or is this just a total mirage and like don't expect to get goals from Quinn Hughes moving forward? He's an assist guy.
Yeah, I remember them talking about that too in the preseason. Yeah, I think it's probably closer to a mirage, but it's definitely a nice bonus. Like, I don't see him being a huge goal scorer either. I kind of view him sort of as a similar player to Morgan Riley, but maybe a little bit more high-end talent than Riley. But yeah, I think he's going to be an assist player. Yeah, sometimes, you get streaky. Just sort of enjoy it while it lasts, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe if there's someone out there that thinks now that your Quinn Hughes is not only like an amazing assist and power play assist person, but also someone who's going to score for you, maybe now's a good time to try to trade him, obviously for a really good return. Okay, so you know what? We've still got a few more injuries and outjuries to get to, but I guess now's a good time, good as any, to take a quick break. So we'll be back in just a sec. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay. Anyways, I'm going to keep going if you are.
Yep.
All right, so I'm here with Michael Amato. This is Elon Dubrovsky, and we've been talking fantasy. Of course, you're listening to Keeping Karlsson right after the commercial break. I guess you know exactly what's going on. So let's just dive back into some more injuries and outjuries. And I wanted to go to Ottawa. I discussed the Josh Norris injury on the last episode of Short Shifts with Jeremy, but we definitely have to dive into it more now that we're seeing like the fallout. First of all, Claude Giroux definitely doesn't mind that Norris is out and he has to play with the new centerman. Giroux had 2 goals and an assist versus Montreal. That brought him to 4 goals and 4 assists in his last 4 games. Like, what a signing by the Sens. Hopefully, the rest of the team can figure things out to like make use of these like 3 years they have of Giroux, but he's looking amazing, like as good as he ever has. And yeah, he's been centered by Ridley Gregg, who is not only getting exposure to Giroud even strength, but even on the power play, because they're playing on the second power play, which is producing, I guess, mainly because they have Giroud there. Greg had an assist and 8 shots in his first game, and then no points and only 1 shot in game 2, and then an assist, but only 1 shot again in Saturday's games. Was it kind of fair to assume at this point that the 8-shot game was like a mirage for Ridley Gregg, and probably he's more going to be an assist guy, kind of like Quinn Hughes?
I would think so. 8 shots is wild. Like unless your name is like Alex Ovechkin or Jack Hughes, you're probably not going to do that too regularly. But that's crazy to put up 8 shots like that the other night. But yeah, it's good. It's a good spot for him. Like centering that in that Ottawa top 6 is pretty potent, right? Like I know the results haven't been there for them, but they have a lot of talent there. Like if you're in that top 6, like you should be able to produce something. And yeah, he's got 2 points in 3 games there. So you can see how he does. I don't know if their schedule is that great coming up. I think they have like 11 days off or something like that.
Yeah, they're going to go Tuesday against Montreal, which
Yeah.
could be pretty good considering they just dropped 5 on Montreal in the last game. But after that, then they're going to go all the way past the weekend and then all the way to the following Saturday. So maybe now's not the best time to grab Ridley Gregg, but definitely someone to watch. And the Sens, yeah, all of a sudden, like you mentioned that they've been having a pretty potent top 6. The lines have actually been really interesting because it seems like now they're trying to go for a top 9 with Norris out, because I'm seeing like they ran with Kachuk, Stutzla, and Matthew Joseph. It's kind of like they have pairs, like Kachuk and Stutzla with someone, and then Giroux and DeBrincat with someone who was Ridley Gregg, and then Batherson and Pinto were with someone who was Derek Brassard. So, which doesn't at the surface look that great for Drake Batherson, I guess, if he's playing with Brassard and Pinto and not with one of those superstars. But at the same time, Batherson has points in each of his last 2 games. So I guess I can't really complain. I guess we've talked about some other players who've been producing even without the most exciting line mates. So it'll be fun to see what the Sens do with these lines. Maybe, more balanced approach with Josh Norris out of the lineup.
Yeah, worth a shot, right? Like I think putting up the offense is good. Makes you harder to defend, right? And sometimes like, yeah, with Batherson, maybe you're not getting, those line mates that you're used to, but you're probably getting a better matchup, right? Than the other end. Like you're probably getting an opponent's sort of weaker lines or weaker defensive lines that you're going up against, right? If you're going to be down on that third line. So could work out. It seems to not be hurting just yet.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, right? I guess a lot of these guys we're talking about, yeah, you split it up to third lines. You might be like, oh no, this guy's playing with not such great players. But yeah, if they're playing against the other team's third weakest or third best like defenders, that could work out really well.
Essentially, how like the Penguins won 2 cups like a few years back, right? They put Phil Kessel on that third line for most of those playoffs, and he just feasted on the other teams and he scored like a ton of goals, right? That's how they utilized them, and it really worked out for them. So yeah, I'm not saying that's gonna happen with the Sens, but you never know. Like it's sometimes it looks like it always looks bad when players on the third line and they don't have a ton of talent around them, but sometimes there's a silver lining.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, well, of course, one big difference is the Penguins had like much better defense than Ottawa.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there was that cup they won back when Letang was injured the whole time. And if you look at who their decor was, like led by like Justin Schultz or whatever, it wasn't even that amazing. And Ottawa has a couple of interesting guys all of a sudden. Like obviously Shabbat, who was cold for a bit, but I think it was a goal in the last game. Also, I've been talking about Jake Sanderson on my last couple of podcasts. He really seems to be waking up. He has points in 3 straight now. Again, we've talked about Ottawa's kind of weak schedule, but at the same time, in a lot of fantasy leagues, D is really hard to come by. And Sanderson gets huge minutes. He's on this like second power play with the one with Giroux. Yeah, he's starting to pick up the pace a little bit. So I'm curious what you think. Like, is he someone you would jump on, even if you know you're only going to get 2 games in the next matchup? But moving forward, maybe if you don't grab him, then you'll have missed your chance and he'll be held for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like their schedule is so challenging. Like I think if they had a few more games coming up, like I probably would grab him. But I also think Sanderson, like you mentioned the minutes, like that's a huge thing, right? Like especially if you're in any league that counts, blocks, hits, shots, you just want players that play a lot, I think. And he fits that category. And I really think his value is going to be like, next season or the season beyond, right? Like if you're in a keeper league, there's a guy that, if you're in a league that keeps a lot of players, a deeper one, like that's one guy you want to look at, because it feels like, yeah, he's, like you said, he is coming along, and it feels like he's going to really click at some point, and yeah, you're going to probably want him on this.
Yeah, and plus, it doesn't even seem like Thomas Chabot has been like the most amazing top power play quarterback. Like, I wonder if at some point, maybe not this season, but I wonder if at some point Sanderson could even challenge to get the most power play time. I guess that's a discussion for the summer or for like future seasons.
It's not out of the question for sure. I kind of put Chabot in, like, I always say I have this sort of like category of players that are better in real life than in fantasy. And like Shabbat isn't it for me. Like Jonas Brodin, Keandre Miller, Mark Stone. Like I have a group of guys that I think are really good players, but they're not like super great for fantasy. And I always have Shabbat in there. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me if Sanderson could overtake him at some point.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like some of these players show their value almost by like how badly things go when they're not around. Like I know like
Yeah,
Mark Stone, I wasn't planning on bringing him up, but like Vegas has totally disappeared ever since Mark Stone has gotten injured. Like Eichel isn't doing anything. Like
huge
remember
loss.
when
Yeah.
yeah, Chandler Stevenson was like this like fantasy darling, and all of a sudden he's kind of nothing without Mark Stone. Like he really seems to be the straw that stirs the drink over there.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But then you look at his numbers, and they're not bad, but you always think like they're going to be so much more given like how good of a player he is. But yeah, he just makes everyone else go. Right? Like he really that line of Eichel, Stevenson, and Stone, that was maybe like the best line in hockey for the first couple months of the year. Now I think they moved Stevenson down to like I think he's centering the third line last time I checked, which isn't ideal. But yeah, I think if Stone doesn't come back soon, it's not looking good for Eichel. He's really, really ice cold right now.
Yeah, yeah. If you look at Jack Eichel's stats recently, he is pointless in his last 5 games. So the word is that Stone could be back after the All-Star break, and definitely anyone with Jack Eichel is really hoping that'll, be the case. He did take 7 shots in the last game, but before that, he had 2 games with only 2 shots. So Eichel really, like, he had such a great start, and now it's sort of disintegrating. So hopefully things can turn around. Anyways, I was on Ottawa. I wanted to mention one last thing, which is in net. So Talbot is hurt. Anton Forsberg had 2 really good games on a back-to-back, which is hard to do for a goalie. I guess the second one was against Montreal, but still counts. Assuming Talbot is like healthy post-break, maybe he's just took the extra time. I'm assuming that Forsberg's also going to play Tuesday. How do you see the net shaking out? I guess I haven't thrown too many goalie questions at you, but you are the goalie post expert here. So do you have any prognostication skills about how some of these tandems are going to turn out?
Yeah, Ottawa was an interesting one. I think like Forsberg was actually pretty good to start the year when Talbot was injured for the first 4 or 5 weeks. I actually drafted him. He was pretty solid. And then Talbot got back and they started splitting time, and then Talbot kind of took over. So I don't know. I think it kind of depends if they're really in the playoff race, which it doesn't look like they're going to be. So if that's the case, I don't really see them leaning on one guy. It's just really not necessary unless one guy starts going on an incredible run. So I could just see them kind of splitting time a little bit. I don't see that as a situation where one guy's really going to take that over, or in kind of some sort of
Right. So which makes neither of them like super appealing. Like obviously grab Forsberg now,
yeah,
maybe for Tuesday versus Montreal, but you might not want to hold all the way to the following Saturday, especially if Talbot is healthy by then.
exactly.
Okay, next injury. So not super fantasy relevant, but I do want to talk about some players on their team. So Gustav Nyquist out indefinitely. Who knows, maybe out for the season. Like Columbus has no reason to rush him back, obviously. So then the lines shook up again, as they happen like crazy. Last episode of Keeping Karlsson last Sunday, we were talking about Jack Roslovic on the top line just for like the Monday game for him to play on that line for like 5 minutes and then get bumped to like the fourth line and have like one of his lowest time on ice games. So very tricky to predict how things are going to go in Columbus. But one guy who is looking very good, and I don't want to jinx him like I jinxed Jack Roslovic, but Kirill Marchenko has been playing with Johnny Gaudreau and Boone Jenner, at least in the last game. And also Columbus has been going with 5 forwards on the power play recently for at least some of the time. And Kirill Marchenko has been on that unit. And Marchenko looking really good. Like, obviously I don't want to like discount that Johnny Gaudreau is also doing like really amazing. And I'm really like impressed with people who drafted him, because I know I was a little bit nervous about like how he would do on this team, but like it seems like things are going pretty well. But I can't ask you too many fantasy relevant questions about Gaudreau. So we could talk about Marchenko, who was pointless in the last game. But before that, he had a 3-game goal streak. He currently actually has 13 goals and no assists in 27 games this season. I'm talking about Marchenko. So it's almost like a goal every 2 games, which is like a 40 goal pace, but also like a 40-point pace, so it's hard to tell like how valuable that would be in fantasy. Kind of like another Victor Olofsson, who also
Yeah,
scores a lot.
they're battling for the Cy Young award. That's what somebody said. 13 goals, no assists. Yeah, Olafson's got something crazy. I think Olafson's on pace for like 41 goals and 10 assists or something like that, or something
That's
crazy.
wild. At least Olofsson's passed it a couple times.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. Like I think it goes back to what you said earlier. Like with Columbus, you never know like on a given day, who's going to be in the lineup and who's not. They've kind of been similar to when they had Tortorella as coach. I don't think a lot's changed. Like, yeah, someone gets a shot on the first line, and then the next day, like they're on the fourth line, and then they might even be scratched. Like you never know. So I think like Marchenko's been playing really good. If you're in a league with, where goals are maybe weighted more heavily, like there's a guy to look at. Because yeah, he is scoring at a pretty good pace. Like I think is he played like 27 games, 13 and 27 or something like that.
Yeah,
So that's a pretty good average there. He's
for
scoring basically
sure.
a goal every 2 games. So yeah, like if you're in a deep league and you're looking for some offense, he's probably as good as option as any right now.
Yeah, plus you could always check the lines, before the game. If he's still going to be playing with Gaudreau, not a guarantee with Columbus that he's going to stay there for the whole game, but at least, that's the best info you can get going into a game. And unfortunately, you can't make ad drops mid-game, but that would actually be very interesting. Why doesn't that exist in fantasy, by the way? You should be able to. Why not just drop a guy, add someone else? You only get the stats from when you pick them up.
I actually heard of a league. I think it was fantasy football. Someone told me they were in a fantasy football league once where you could flip somebody on your bench to somebody that started like at the
Oh, I
end of
love
Sunday.
that.
Yeah. So one player. That would be cool. Maybe in like fantasy hockey, you could do that like one a week. You could flip sort of one player from
Oh,
your
like a
bench
weekly. Yeah.
that you left on the bench and one player that you started. Maybe they had a terrible game. You just throw somebody in. That would be a cool thing for some fantasy leagues. But yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Like in a weekly league, yeah, that would be cool. That wouldn't be too hard for something like Yahoo, but it would be cool if it was even like mid game. Maybe that now I'm asking for too much. It'd be cool if I could pull my own goalie, like
Oh yeah,
2 goals
that
against
would
on
be
5 shots. Like I
of
don't like it.
course. Yeah, how many times do you have free goalie starting and you got to bench one, and of course the one you bench gets a shutout.
Yeah,
It's
it'd be
always
fun to put him in halfway through. Be like, okay, he's looking good.
exactly.
Anyhow, Marchenko likely going to be on the top line for the next game. And so if he is, he's somewhat interesting, I guess, in deeper leagues, of course. All right, next injury, Noah Dobson over on the Islanders. This is like a lower body injury, and he could be back after the All-Star breaks. This is just another opportunity for me to talk about the team. I guess I'm not going to go in and like start discussing like if you should be grabbing Sam Bolduc, who was on the top power play in the last game with Dobson out. Though it was kind of interesting that in this last game for the Islanders, Sam Bolduc was on the top power play. And then the fake Sebastian Aho was on the second power play. So Ryan Pulock hasn't been getting even no power play with Dobson out. You would think at least now Ryan Pulock should get top power play, but he didn't get any in the last like 3 games now. It's pretty wild. Like I still remember when Ryan Pulock was looking like he'd be a huge fantasy force a few years back. Like people were really excited about him, especially in multi-category leagues. And now it's like, yeah, he's just of no interest at all to anybody.
Honestly, the Islanders got to be the most frustrating. Somebody asked me that in my mailbag column this week. Who's the team you're most frustrated with this year in fantasy? And I said, hands down, it's the Islanders. Like, I'm not grabbing any Islanders right now. Like they've scored, I don't know what it's been. Like it's something like 14 of their last 16 games, they've scored 2 goals or less. I want to say maybe 7 in a row. Like they just don't score. Like they just don't score any goals. They're such a frustrating team. It feels like Barry Trotz never left. They're just like the exact same team they were a year ago, and they have so much talent. And like even last night, I think when they were in overtime against Vegas, like there's just some of the decisions I see. Like I think they started Pajo, Parise, and I think it was Polak maybe in overtime, and it's like you have Nelson and Lee, who are like the only 2 guys doing pretty much anything right now, and you start those 3 guys. Like I don't know, I just don't understand what they're doing a lot of times. They have some interesting young players that they barely play. Like I know, like even earlier in the year, Wallstrom was looking pretty good for a couple games here and there, and then you'd look at his stat line. Oh, he plays 9 minutes or 10 minits, and like what's he going to do with that amount of ice time? So I don't know. Unless your name is like Brock Nelson or Anders Lee, I'm kind of avoiding you right now if you're an Islanders player. They just don't score enough.
Man, and that's especially hurts people who have Tyler Seguin or no. So, man, and that especially hurts people who have wait, why am I totally blanking here? Oh, Barzal. Okay. Man, that totally hurts for people who have Matt Barzal that you didn't even list him in the players that you'd be interested in. But yeah, it's reasonable. He's been super cool. He had I guess, an overtime goal in a recent game,
Yeah.
but 5-on-5 or like power play, like nothing for Barzal recently.
Yeah, and I should have included Barzal. And in fact, ironically, he did like an Islanders goal saved my matchup. Ironically, as much as I've been on them, negatively for the past little bit, like I needed that goal to win my matchup because I was 1 save percentage point behind my opponent who had Logan Thompson. So I basically needed an Islanders goal last night in overtime, win the matchup, and he got it. So at least they did that for me.
Nice. I am having the exact opposite luck this week. I was up like 40 going into the weekend. I thought I'd just relax, maybe use my last move to grab like a Tolvanen on Sunday for the next matchup. And then just yesterday, it just completely evaporated. And now today, I was up by 9 today. And now, just as you were talking, that's why for people who are listening to the raw version, I forgot Barzal's name and needed to retake. And that's because I saw Jordan Stahl scored an empty net goal, which is going to kill me here. Unless like David Pasternak, who of course like is doing nothing today. Unless Pasternak could give me a point in the final 2 minutes of this Boston Carolina game, I'm gonna have
So
one
is
of the
that 3 straight Bruins losses? Maybe.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, yeah, they're down 4-1, so they're definitely gonna lose after never losing ever. Yeah, 3 in a row. That's a good point.
That's wild.
Okay. Anyway, I'll try to gather myself to continue this show. I did want to mention actually another player on the Islanders that's getting what you said. Only Nelson and Lee are doing something, but actually there's one other player, and that's their line mate for these last few games, and that's the recently outjured Kyle Palmieri, who has been like not fantasy relevant for a couple years now. I remember when he first went to the Islanders, we used to debate on the show like, what line is he going to go on? Is he like, and then he quickly like showed us that he's not going to do what he had done in New Jersey in years past. And like now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's on the line with the two good producers in Nelson and Lee, who are both point per game over the past couple of weeks. And Palmieri, 5 assists, 11 shots in 4 games since returning. And Palmieri is not only playing with these two, Nelson and Lee, at even strength, but he's also been on the top power play with those guys in Barzal, and recently Sam Bulldog as the top power play quarterback. And to add to this, if people are starting to be like, oh, I guess I should be starting to get a little interested about Kyle Palmieri, the Islanders actually have a pretty good schedule. They play 4 times in the week after the All-Star break. So I don't know. It's hard to like recommend Palmieri as like a long-term thing, but is he someone you'd be jumping on right now while he's hot and on this good line?
I consider it because, as you mentioned, the schedule. I think there's next week, sort of. I would say next week's matchup, but I guess it's like over 2 weeks. It's so hard to navigate. So I think anybody playing 4 games in that second week, that's going pretty good right now, is probably a good one to consider. And yeah, I think as tough as it's been for the Isles to score, like Lee and Nelson are clicking, and yeah, he's on that line. He's taking advantage of it. So yeah, if you're looking for a player for the following week, I think he'd be a decent move.
Yeah, take a look at Kyle Palmieri and see if he can keep this up somewhat. Okay, not Oucher, another guy who's back finally after missing a lot of time is Shea Theodore. So yeah, we were talking about Vegas and how they've been really struggling lately. Jack Eichel pointless in 5. I didn't even mention Alex Pietrangelo pointless in 4, which isn't great. And yeah, Shea Theodore came back 2 games, also pointless, which isn't very good. Of course, Vegas has only managed to score a goal in each of those games, so it's not as if Theodore had a lot of opportunities to get in on some goals. It's now 7 losses in 8 games for Vegas. Who like let me put it this way, like 3 players that are on everyone's rosters, Eichel, Pietrangelo, and Theodore. Are any of them like concerning to you, like especially, and someone that you think maybe they won't bounce back for the second half? Or do you think they're all just going to be fine and maybe just need like Mark Stone to come back into the lineup?
I think Mark Stone is the key thing there. And I think like as a whole, like Vegas doesn't look nearly as good as they were in the first couple months. I saw a stat today on Twitter. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like they have like the 8th fewest regulation wins in the last 2 months or something in the league. Like Vegas, like they just, and as you said, they've lost 7 of 8 now. So yeah, they just don't look as potent as they did earlier in the year. Obviously Stone's that, but yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty confident they should be okay. Like there's enough talent there. They should bounce back, especially if Stone can stay healthy. But yeah, I definitely be mildly concerned right now, just given that overall the team looked kind of like a juggernaut the first little bit, and now they just don't look anything near that. So
yeah, it's kind of a bummer because last year was like such a surprise they didn't make the playoffs, and you were able to just blame it on injuries. But now if they go 2 years in a row, I mean they're still in a spot right now, I think, but yeah, it's falling apart pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting to see if they could bounce back. Okay, one more outjury. Rupe Hintz, I should say it properly. Rope Hintz is back with Dallas, and he's back on the top line, and he scored versus New Jersey yesterday. So it seems like everything in Dallas is now finally getting back to normal. There was some weirdness of Hintz on the second line and Seguin on the top line, but that's over, it seems. And Seguin is now pointless in 4 games. is it like just simple to say? And I know it's like harsh because he's Tyler Seguin. He used to be such a big star. But do you think if people still have him on their roster, they're maybe snoozing potentially, and it's time to consider dropping him and moving on to someone else? Like, let's say, I don't know, like Kyle Palmieri is out there at free agency. Is it really like ridiculous to consider swapping out Seguin for Palmieri?
I don't think it is at this point. Like I was beating the drum 2 weeks ago to sell high on him, like to see if you could trade him for something because he actually looked really good while Hintz was out. He put up a ton of points there in the 6 or 7 games he played. So he really boosted his stock. And yeah, I knew he was gonna obviously drop back down and the points were gonna kind of disappear. So I think that would have been a great time to try and get something for him in a trade. But yeah, now I mean, if you're still holding him, like just gonna have to kind of with maybe the odd point here and there. He's not going to be as consistent as he was when he was on that top line for sure. So there are better options out there. Yeah, I think you can drop him.
Damn. Yeah, man, a big fall. I always kind of think of like Tyler Seguin and Taylor Hall kind of in the
Yeah.
same breath. Yeah, they both have sort of like fallen off at around the same times in their careers.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like you have a lot of these. I always say like use the term like name recognition. He's got a lot of name recognition. His name just pops for you. It's always hard to move on from those guys in fantasy. And ironically, like I think Eric Karlsson was like that for a lot of years, and now like all of a sudden he's just like phenomenal again. So, you can't say for absolute certainty that's not going to happen. But yeah, I think with Sagan, like he's obviously just not like an elite player. I don't know if he ever really made it to an elite status, but I don't think he's much more than like a 55 player.
Yeah, bummer. I remember early on when we were doing this podcast, I feel like every week or two we'd be having a segment of like who's playing with Sagan and Ben over in Dallas, and it would be like Patrick Eves or it would be Jason Spezza or whoever, and then that's the player that you'd want to add. But now, yeah, no one talks about who's playing with Sagan and we even are his line Mason Marchment. I don't know. Let me see. The Dallas is line Sagan, Faxa, and Marchment. So
Oh
yeah.
boy.
Well, Dallas, I guess they just like running that awesome top line, and they're fine doing the opposite of what the Sens are doing, I guess.
Radek Faksa was like my go-to guy in a face-off league a couple years ago. Like if I on Sunday, if I was down by like a bunch of face-offs, I would just grab him because he always so
Nice. Well, and Taylor Hall, I should mention, did score a goal today for Boston since I brought him up with that, the Tyler Seguin talk. Unfortunately for me, David Pasternak didn't score a goal and he didn't assist on it, and that's why I lost by 2 points. But anyways, I'll stop harping on that. Hall's like in a good spot. Like now he's been playing recently on the top line. For a while he was on the third line, even with Jake DeBrusk injured, and like Craig Smith was on the top line. But in this game, Hall was playing, yeah, with Bergeron and Marchand. But of course, they did lose 5-1 now. Like you said, it's 3 losses in a row. So I wouldn't be banking on this holding. Boston has one more game still to go before the All-Star break. So yeah, definitely if you have Taylor Hall, I think it's probably very similar to if you have Tyler Seguin, right? It's like lots of name recognition, but just isn't coming together. He's been cold for a while now.
yeah, I think you know what you're gonna get from Hall too. But I think with Hall, it's more like it's hard to drop somebody playing on that line, that top line right now, especially with the Brusque out. But yeah, again, it's tough. Like I think he obviously hit a higher peak than Sagan did, but yeah, it seems like he's not gonna get close to that.
Oh well, but we have new exciting players on hot streaks that we could talk about instead. We can't hang our hats on the Segans and Halls forever, or even the Jack Eichels as it seems right now. But yeah, I've got a lot to get to. So how about Michael? This has been awesome so far. The time has totally flown by, but we've been generally breaking the show into 2 parts. So let's call this the official end of part 1. Thanks everyone for listening. You should already have part 2 waiting for you in your podcast feed. So we'll be back soon with more from Michael Amato, all about some hot streaks and cold streaks. So talk to you soon. All right. This has been so fun. It really is good going vibe. So yeah, I think we'll get through all of this in even shorter time. So if you have any other players you want to bring up at the end, but or if anyone in the chat has a question that they want us to tackle, you could throw it in and I'll add it to the list potentially. Or maybe Michael will just appreciate going back to his kids. I don't know. But
No, I'm happy to answer questions.
all right. All right, here we go. The Hurricanes beat the Bruins 4-1. The Leafs beat the Caps 5-1. I lost my couple matchup, but we are here for part 2 of this episode of Keeping Karlsson, and we are going to have a lot more fun with Michael Amato from Sportsnet, from Goalie Post. If you haven't listened to part 1, you've missed out on all the injuries and outjuries and the effects of those. It's been a really fun chat, and now we are going to dive into some hot streaks and cold streaks. Michael, thanks again for coming on the show, and I'm going to start with an easy one, okay? Because I kind of feel like I was looking at like who are the hottest players in the NHL right now, and it's like all kind of the guys you'd expect them to be, like our typical Oilers, including, by the way, Zach Hyman, who now is almost like in the same conversation as like your Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and like maybe even above your Evander Kane's at this point. Crosby, Aho, Jack Hughes, Kucherov, Barkov, Tage Thompson, Roman Josi, like Hamilton, like they're all red hot. I almost kind of feel like, does it feel good to you to just kind of see like the guys you expect to be good, like do well? It almost like it puts me a little bit on edge when like we have to talk about like why is Crosby not scoring, or like, well, I don't think we've ever talked about why isn't McDavid not getting a point. But yeah, everything seems to be kind of normal in the NHL right now, which is pretty interesting.
It's always a good sign when that happens, especially, if you're rostering any of those players. I think a lot of times, those guys can carry your team, right? Like you're relying on them to get points regularly. And, I think a lot of times, more often than not, that's why you win in fantasy, is because, your top guys just go off and kind of carry your team. Because yeah, if you're banking on, everyone on your roster to always kind of produce consistently, it's not going to happen. So you definitely want your first few picks to always be really producing at a high level.
Yeah, I think like the highest pick that's turned out to be a really big bust, and I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head, so maybe in the chat or maybe you can tell me if I'm missing someone. I feel like Jonathan Huberdeau is probably the guy who has picked the highest in leagues that's really letting their managers down. I'll bet you if Yahoo were to release the stats of like people who drafted Huberdeau and they're like, what percentage of them are like making their fantasy playoffs or like winning championships, I'd imagine it's been like super low because he's been such a bust. And Brian and I have already discussed how like we don't really see much reason, like not that he's going to be terrible, like he'll probably still like pace for like 60-70 points, but like nothing close to the 100+ points that people were drafting him for.
Yeah, he's definitely been number one, for sure. Like he's just been a huge bust. Nothing's clicked. I think I just think it's been hard for him to adjust there. Obviously, like Daryl Sutter's a much different coach. It hasn't been going well. So yeah. So it was funny today. Someone asked me a question on Twitter. It was like, I forget the other right winger they said, but it was somebody like well below Huberdeau's status. They were like, who should I add on waivers? This guy or Huberdeau? And it wasn't like satirical. It was like a legitimate question. I had to actually think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is this other guy actually better right now than Jonathan Huberdeau? I think it might have been Josh Anderson or something. And I was just like,
oh wow.
Yeah, I'm like, I guess Huberdeau still, he has more upside, but it's not the craziest question. Yeah, and I think you're right about Huberdeau. The other guy I would say was maybe Patrick Kane. I think was drafted like probably a little bit behind Huberdeau, like maybe 10 picks or so behind him, but maybe 15 or whatever. But I think a lot of people thought he'd still, pretty much be fine. But the Blackhawks are just hitting a new low. So I don't know if he's going to get traded to a better team, but yeah, that one's not going too well either.
Yeah, at least he like hopefully wasn't being taken in the first round of drafts. But yeah,
so.
Anyone like, but at least people I feel like I'm okay with it because it's like people knew that they were taking a risk because we knew how bad Chicago was looking. So it wasn't like it didn't seem like a sure thing. It was like a high upside pick that I probably wouldn't have taken.
And I think a lot of people are like, you know what, maybe he'll get traded to like the Rangers at the deadline, and then for fantasy playoffs, it'll just be amazing. So people are still holding on hope for that. But I think with Huberdeau, yeah, it's looking more and more like a hopeless situation.
Yeah, there was a trade in the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. Like there's like 40 divisions, and like, Brian, myself, and this guy Kevin Hebert, who's amazing, I like oversee them all, so we kind of see when every trade comes in. And there was Huberdeau for Ricard Raquel, so not as bad as like for Josh Anderson, but like, it's one of those things where like you sort of notice it quickly, because I got Raquel out of free agency like earlier on in the season. Like he had a bit of a slow start. Obviously, he wouldn't be in free agency now in any leagues, but yeah, just made me think like, wow, a guy that was drafted in the first round or second round was traded for a guy who I got out of free agency. But at this point, we didn't even consider vetoing it, right? Or like even thinking about it.
And it's so hard to like it when people ask questions about it too. It's like, part of you says like, how can I honestly tell this person to drop Huberdeau because it's Jonathan Huberdeau? He had like 115 points last year. Because what if next week he just goes off and starts on this crazy run? But I just don't see it happening.
Well, yeah, and
really rough here.
Yeah, and by the way, another guy on Calgary that I think would be reasonable to drop at this point is their presumable starting goaltender going into the year, Jacob Markstrom. Another really brutal game for him on Thursday. And then Dan Vladar came in on Friday, picked up a win versus Seattle, who's a pretty high scoring team at this point and one of the top teams in the West. Like, so Jeremy and I were talking about Markstrom on Thursday's short shift show, and we were kind of suggesting, like, if like Vladar has a good game on Friday, I feel like post All-Star break, the job should be his. Like, and then now it's up to Markstrom to earn it back. Do you think at this point, like that's how it is in like Sutter's mind as well? Like, do you think Vladar gets the first game out of the break and maybe he has a chance to run as the starter until he falters?
He certainly should. Like Vladar hasn't lost in regulation in I think 13 straight games now. Like it should have been Vladar's net for a long time. And Sutter, I know Sutter is super loyal to Markstrom, and that's why he keeps going back to Markstrom. But if that Thursday game against the Blackhawks where Markstrom gave up 4 goals and they lost by 1, like that should have been the last straw. If Vladar comes back, like you said, the next night on a back-to-back, beats a good Seattle team in Seattle, plays really well. Like, yeah, to me, the net should be his right now. But, I don't know. It's Daryl Sutter. I kind of have him in that John Tortorella category, very unpredictable. He kind of likes to go with veterans a lot. He doesn't trust young players, so I don't know how much he's going to trust Vladar, but Vladar flat out been better. I think over the last month and a half. And yeah, if it were me, I've got Vladar in a league. Like I'm sort of been counting on him. I think that's the guy to have right now if you're going with the Calgary.
Okay, but so yeah, definitely. I think at this point, it's a pretty easy advice to say that if people need goaltending in their league, like Vladar is probably somebody you want to grab like ASAP. He's only 24% rostered on Yahoo right now. I think that's going to go up, especially if he gets that next start. I guess the harder question is, if you had Markstrom, like, are you just going to drop him? Because goalies in most fantasy leagues are really hard to come by. But at the same time, he's like, even if he gets a start, he's been blowing you up most of the time. Like you said, this game against Chicago probably gave people negative points.
Yeah, that's the tricky question. I think it comes down to like how much faith do you have in Calgary that they're going to kind of return to a strong team, like maybe the team that started the year or the team that closer to the team that was there last year, or are they just going to be this team that's like fighting for a playoff spot? Because if they're that team, then I think Markstrom's not that valuable because, like you said, he's really been struggling, but the team hasn't really been able to prop him up as much lately because they don't look as strong or as dominant as they were earlier in the season. So yeah, I for me, I'm really not touching Markstrom. If you've got him, it's a tough one, right? Like that's sort of maybe one of the best sort of examples of the 0G strategy. Don't invest in goalies too high because you obviously get into these situations. And one of the things too is like you almost feel attached, right? You feel attached to the goalies that you draft really high and you don't want to give up on them, whether it's like a Jack Campbell earlier this year or a Demko or some of these other guys that were struggling. So yeah, you can always find different options on the waiver wire. So I think if you're in a roster crunch, yeah, I think Markstrom is probably a drop right now if you need to. But again, goalies, like you said, goalies that position where it's not as fruitful on the waiver wire. I guess it would depend on who's out there. If you've got like a UPL still out there kicking around, maybe you could take a chance on him. But yeah, not every league has that. So
Yeah, I think it also probably depends a bit on where you are in your league standings. Like if you're in first
for
place,
sure.
if you're doing well, then I guess you can ride out Markstrom and just kind of hope and then like be ready to drop him before your fantasy playoffs if he still hasn't bounced back. But yeah, if you need to win now, like he does not seem dependable, unfortunately. Uh, but switching over, so Vladar did beat that Seattle team, though he did let in 1 goal, and that was to Eli Tolvanen, who is super hot right now on Seattle, still available in a lot of leagues. I wonder if that's going to start drying up soon. Tolvanen's now scored in 3 straight games. He's up to like 8 goals in 15 games, like with Seattle. He's been like such a huge addition. It's pretty wild that Nashville just like, first of all, they never played him, and then they ended up waiving him. Like I can't even think of an example. I don't know if you're able to, like, has this ever happened before where a player's just been waived and then like, then claimed by another team and then like right away just becomes like one of their top goal scorers?
I can't think about it. I can't think of anyone like that. I remember like not a score obviously, but like Alex Adelkovic a couple of years ago, but with Carolina, obviously he was a goalie. but yeah, I don't remember somebody from the offensive side doing that. Yeah, he's looked really good. And for a while there, like there weren't many forwards on the Kraken, and you couldn't find a spot for him on your roster. Like even Daniel Sprong in his like 10 minutes a night was really producing a lot of offense, and they were scoring a lot of goals as a whole, as a team. So I don't know. Yeah, I think you could definitely give him a shot. I just feel like he is probably more of a I feel like he's probably more of a streamer than a guy that you kind of want to hold. Like I feel like
That's
he's
fair.
a good 3 games and then probably goes quiet for 2 or 3 and then he picks it back up. So, again, I think you mentioned sort of talk about the Flames, like if you're in the top position of your league and you can afford to maybe take a bit more risk, like maybe that's somebody you just take a chance on if you have a roster spot and see what he does. But yeah, I guess too, if you're fighting for a playoff spot in your league too, and you're looking for offense, he's also someone to consider. So yeah, I think if you're not giving up anybody significant for him and it's just an injury replacement, why not? Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah, and hey, like Seattle actually has one of the better schedules next week. They don't play it all. Like most people are in these like Yahoo 2 week matchups coming up, like 2 weeks for one matchup, I should say. And Seattle doesn't play it all in those first 3 days before the break, but then they have 4 games in the second week and like not on Saturday, which is a busy day. So you're guaranteed to like actually be able to fit in those 4 games. So now would be a good time to grab Tolvanen. He's been playing on a line with Gourde and Bjorkstrand, who like also like I feel like Seattle has a bunch of guys that like for a team. I did this show called the Matchup Maximizer. I kind of looked at the schedules and dove into it. I was kind of like Seattle has like every forward is under 50% rostered on Yahoo. So you probably, depending on how deep your league is, have your pick of a few of these guys, and they all are kind of interesting. This Bjorkstrand, Gourde, Tolvanen. I can see that line getting a goal. Like Eberle, McCann, Wenberg in a deeper league. Burakovsky, like there's lots of options there. So yeah, Tolvanen's definitely jumping out though, and I think it's I'd love to hear an interview with him. Like, have they played Nashville yet? So that'll be a really fun
I
game when
remember.
let me check the game log really quickly. Yeah, Nashville's not coming up. That'll be really fun when he plays his first game, especially like a road game in Nashville. But okay, I'm gonna circle that on the calendar.
Yeah, you mentioned Bjorkstrand too. Like that's another guy that I haven't checked lately, but I remember his shooting percentage being like crazy low for what his sort of career average was. I feel like he's a guy that is also poised to break out too, but it's just tough to roster. He hasn't really just like
Well, actually, no, it's a good call. He has 4 points in his last 3 games. He had 2 goals against the Canucks, for whatever that's worth, and then he had an assist in each of his last couple of games. Maybe also for what it's worth versus Calgary and Markstrom, and then Columbus. But yeah, he has been taking a lot of shots. Yeah, Oliver Bjorkstrand, another guy. If again, like Seattle has a good schedule, so stream in Bjorkstrand or Tolvanen, maybe flip a coin, and then maybe they do turn into a hold. Maybe not, but you'll at least get a good number of games in the short term.
yeah.
I guess let's switch to some D now. So Drew Doughty was having a pretty meh season overall, but he now has 9 points in his last 9 games. I'm curious to know do you think Drew Doughty is back and is going to be like super valuable in the second half of the year? Like he's never been someone like it's funny. He has a reputation as being like a really awesome, like offensive defenseman. I feel like he had that one year. I guess it wasn't even the year they won the North. Like he had like 60 points way back in 2017-18. Since then, he's never broken 50. I guess he did pace for 65 last season, but he missed a lot of times. So he had 31 points in 39 games. Right now, he's pacing for 50, but like pacing for 82 over the last 9 games, like I said. So just curious to get your take. He is the top power play guy on LA. Fiala's there now, Kopitar. Like maybe Kopitar, I should finish that sentence. Kopitar's doing well again. So do you think that like Doughty is poised to maybe put up one of his better offensive seasons of his career? Like his best ever is 60, like I said, and currently he's pacing for 50, but trending higher than that.
I can see him getting maybe 50 plus. Again, I don't know if he hits maybe getting closer to 60, but yeah, I kind of like you said, I don't view him anymore as like the super offensive guy. I think he's just sort of like a solid player. I think his fantasy stock has dropped a lot in the last few years. Yeah, I don't know. He's an interesting guy. I wondered too about him. Like, I know Sean Dursey last year had a ton of power play points. I wondered if he would kind of eat into Doughty's time a bit and steal some of those power play points from him on that second unit. But yeah, I think with Doughty and the Kings, I don't view him as a huge point producer. I think it's kind of funny, right? Like, and it's 60 points is like really good for defenseman, but I almost think like over the last couple of years, it just doesn't look as great when you have guys like Yossi, almost touching 100. Makar just cruising to 80 points. Fox, Hedman getting 80. Right, like it almost feels like 60 is just kind of like an okay season now. Sometimes for a defenseman when it's actually pretty strong. But yeah, I think some of the other stuff he provides obviously still plays a lot of minutes and stuff like that. So yeah, it's great if he can get close to 60. If he hasn't done that in 5 or 6 years, I think it's easy for him.
Yeah, LA is like looking good this year. I think, especially when they don't play Jonathan Quick in net. When they've been playing Copley,
Yeah,
they've been looking a good team.
yeah, that's a team that needed a goalie big time. They're a really strong team, and they just couldn't get a save earlier. And I wondered if they were going to be in the trade market. Hopefully, he's kind of quieted that down. Huh?
Yeah, but would you like if you were running the Kings, would you trade for a goalie or would you be okay like because this is a team that's probably going to make the playoffs, like could potentially go on a run. Like they have a lot of strong players. They have three good lines. Like they've been running Byfield on the top line with Kopitar and Kempe, and that's been going pretty well. And then Arvidsson, Dano, and normally it's Trevor Moore. I haven't heard anything about Trevor Moore in like a million years. I hope he's okay. But yeah, then but theoretically, if Moore is there, then they could have a Iafallo and Fiala on the third line with like Lazat. Like I don't know, it seems like this could be a pretty stacked team. And then yeah, like Doughty, Jersey, whatever on D. It's just a matter of goaltending. So yeah, what would you do? Would you trade for someone, or would you be okay with riding out Copley?
I would try to trade for someone. I mean, I wouldn't be super confident. Like Copley's been great, but for the most part, but I would not trust him like in a first round series against like the Oilers or something like that. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. But I guess how do you fit him in, right? Then are you sending Copley back down? Because I don't think you're sending like Jonathan Quick down, or are you waving Jonathan Quick? Like I don't know how you're gonna have like I forget what Quick's contract is, but you're gonna have like $10 million in goaltending between him and Peterson, like in the AHL. Or I don't know
That'd be
how
wild.
that's. Yeah, I don't even know how that would work. But yeah, for me though, it almost like I kind of think like there was a small window there where like maybe Antti Ranta was available, but now it feels like he's probably not available because they don't really trust Anderson's injury history. I don't know that there's that many good goalies available, right? Like there was talk about like Montembeau, but it sounds like Montreal really likes him, wants to keep him. So I don't know who's out there. Like Corpusalo, like is that really an upgrade? Like I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. Like maybe John Gibson, but that's how you gonna do that with the cap? Like I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I think and I don't know if we'll see a lot of goalie movement at the deadline. Like I'm not sure that many teams that are in contending spots need a goalie. Like I think maybe Pittsburgh might be one, surprisingly, given just like Jari's injuries this year and just playing pretty poorly. Like I think they could be in the market for somebody, but yeah, there's not a lot of teams out there. I think I need a goalie that are in playoff spots.
Yeah, like Shams saying maybe Reimer could be someone
Yeah, that's
that,
another guy.
but still, like you make a good point about how are they going to fit him in, and like I assume they can't even trade Quick. Maybe Quick waives his no trade clause. Who knows? Anyways, whatever. We don't need to speculate. Okay, one guy I do want to ask you about though on LA. I just dropped him. Maybe at this point, like I'm just like behind the times, and like everyone's already been doing this, so you can just be like, maybe it's not even that interesting to me. But Victor Arvidsson was having a pretty good season. Like he was up to like 30, what was it? He was at 33 points in 40 games, like 40 games in. That's like a really strong pace. It's like a 65-ish pace. But he's just totally disappeared recently. Only 1 point in his last 7 games. That was a shorthanded goal, which is cool and good, but also not a very common thing to happen. So as far as like in regular situations, Arvidsson doing nothing. He did have 4 shots in that last game versus Tampa Bay, but nothing went in. I just dropped him. LA doesn't have a great schedule. Like they play just 1 game next week on the Tuesday, I think it is, and then not again until the following Saturday, kind of like Ottawa's schedule. So I don't know. I guess I'm not looking for like affirmation that but like more for the listeners. Do they also have permission from Michael Amato to dump Victor Arvidsson?
Well, you definitely don't need my permission, but I think I would be safe to drop him. I think he's like a boomer bust player. I think sometimes when you look at his like full season stats, like they're kind of misleading. Like it looks kind of good overall, but then if you look at sometimes his game log, it's like, oh, he had like a 3-point night with 6 shots, and then he didn't score for like 3 games, right? And then it's kind of like another game where he has like 6 shots and an assist, and then he goes quiet again. So like for me, I always look at him as more of like a guy I like to stream. Like if I'm down in my matchup on the weekend, I know he could potentially hit for like a big shooting game and a big point game. But yeah, I don't find he's like super consistent. So that's kind of the category I put him in. Kind of like I was talking about with like Colvin earlier, but I think Arvidsson's obviously higher level than that. But yeah, I think when he's
Not
one,
lately.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, not lately, but yeah, overall, I just view him like that. So I think, I don't know, I definitely don't think it's crazy to drop him. Not a must hold.
Okay, yeah. So you could drop him, maybe stream him back in when LA has a good schedule. If someone else grabs him, you don't have to be too worried. He's not on the top power play, right? I remember when he first went to LA, I thought it was going to be really exciting to see him there with Kopitar, but he quickly was moved away from Kopitar at even strength, and now even on the power play. Okay, but anyways, we started by talking about a defenseman, Drew Doughty. I wanted to bring up another defenseman who keeps on like bouncing between being totally useless and then super hot. That's Cam Fowler in Anaheim. And like in fantasy, it's rare to find like a top power play defenseman available on the waiver wire, but Fowler, I'm sure, is available in like the large majority of leagues, and for good reason. He went through a stretch of like, what was it, 3 assists and 15 games or something.
Yeah.
But he was hot earlier in the year, like back around the end of November. And then he's been hot lately. Like Anaheim's been scoring a lot of goals. And he had a 2 assist game versus Colorado. He had 2 goals and assists versus Arizona. Of course, yesterday versus Arizona, no one was able to get much of anything behind Connor Ingram, who I was like so like devastated. If they would have played Vejmelka, I would have won my matchup. But anyways, that's a whole and like Vejmelka, okay, coming off a shutout. Arizona doesn't play again for a long time. Like, why not just get? But again, I think they're tanking. But now even I can't even blame them for trying to tank because Vejmelka or Ingram had a good game. Anyways, I'm off ranting again. But oh yeah, I was talking about Cam Fowler. So anyway, Fowler is doing good again. Is he someone that you're interested in, or is this like for sure? Like if you add Cam Fowler, he's just going to go back to being cold, and you could probably do better, even with like a Jake Sanderson, like we talked about before. Like John Klingberg actually is someone who obviously people were excited to draft, and then he's had a nothing year so far. He actually had 2 assists for the 2 goals Anaheim scored versus Arizona yesterday. But like, is like Fowler and like Klingberg kind of in the same categories here, or is Fowler actually someone that you're interested in?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that late November streak he had, because there was a reader that kept bugging me like to add him to one of my thoughts columns, and I kept saying like, it's Cam Fowler, like what are you talking about? And I just kept looking, and he just kept putting up points and points. So finally I wrote about him, and then he sort of went cold after. But yeah, he's on another good run, I guess. And I think too, with you mentioned Klingberg, yeah, they're kind of in the same boat for me. I feel like the Ducks probably should be featuring Klingberg the most. Like I feel like that's the guy that they're absolutely going to trade to at the deadline. I would think he's on a 1-year deal. They're probably going to try and get something back for him. So that's a guy I would try to be prop up. But I think Fowler's just played better than Klingberg for most of the year, especially on the power play. So that's why he keeps getting that spot. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's another one where you just ride the wave while it lasts, and I'm sure it's going to come back. I think the Ducks might have 4 games in that second week too of the matchup, so
Yeah.
he's definitely got a good schedule. So yeah, if you are going to take a chance, this might be a good time.
Yeah. So if you need D, we've thrown out a couple of options that might be available to you right now. You know what, actually, Mike, maybe I could take a quick break from talking about all this stuff. I keep on ranting about my fantasy. How are you doing in your fantasy leagues? How many? I'm curious to know how many leagues are you in at this point?
So I'm not in that many. I'm a guy that only plays in a couple. I don't like I have one main one that I've been doing with like some family and friends for like probably 15 years now,
Oh wow.
something like that. So it's a long one that it's pretty competitive. It's a keeper. We have like kind of categories. Which I play with in another one with some other folks that I know. But yeah, I don't like playing in that many just because I feel like I kind of keeping tabs on my players. And I feel like if I'm in like 8 or 9 leagues, I basically have every player and I'm playing against every player. So like every goal I get also hurts me in another league, and it's like not even fun to keep tabs on. So I don't know. But yeah, the main one I play in, there's 14 teams. I'm in 4th right now. I'm pretty good. I basically salvaged my season with some kind of crafty waiver wire goaltending shifting. I definitely went with the 0G strategy. I took goalies with 3 of my final 4 picks in a 16-round draft. So I ended up going Forsberg, as I mentioned earlier, who was just okay. And then I took gambles with my last 2 picks on Grubauer and Cal Peterson.
Ouch.
And they lasted about 6 days on my roster. But luckily, somebody dropped Jeremy Swayman when Allmark was really good, so I scooped him. I was able to grab Kochetkov for 2 months, so he carried me. And then I had Aiden Hill for a while, who was really good. And then when Hill sort of slumped, I just grabbed Francouz, and now I dropped Kochetkov for Vladar, so I'm in a pretty good spot. I've kind of settled that down because that was pretty tumultuous there for the first couple of weeks. But yeah, I find I kind of prefer to just wait to see who the strong teams are and who the good goalies are before instead of spending sort of like a fourth or fifth round pick on like a Jack Campbell.
No, it definitely makes sense, and it sounds like it worked out really well for you. As long as you're going to be like keen and watch, what's going on and jump
Yeah.
on anyone who has a chance. Like Vladar might end up being like a really great hold, or maybe Markstrom comes back, a whole new guy, and then you'll have to watch for the next available player to show up.
That's it. Yeah, I say you have to. I call it like you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable if you're going to do that, because there's going to be some weeks where you're just kind of piecing it together. But if you keep tabs on it, you can usually figure it out. And I always like every summer I kind of do a little brainstorming thing, and I've sort of made it into an article the last few summers, like who's going to be the next, Billy Husso from last year, who's going to be the next Alex Nedeljkovic from 2 years ago. So like this year I had like, Piotr Kochetkov was on the list, like Daniil Tarasov, a couple others. So I kind of try and kind of identify those guys in the summer who, could be an injury away from having major value. And as soon as you sort of see that, oh, Frederik Andersen has left the game with a lower body injury, you immediately add Kochetkov on waivers and, you hope for the best. So yeah, it works out. I think too, there's like so much unpredictability with goalies, right? Like who would have thought like Allmark been this dominant, right? Like I think most people probably drafted Swayman before they drafted Allmark this year, in a lot of leagues. So it's hard to really tell when you draft too. I find that's the most unpredictable.
Yeah, and plus, while you use these late picks for goalies, that also means you're getting to enjoy all of your high pick skaters that hopefully were hits.
Exactly, and we were talking about Markstrom. When you draft like a Cal Peterson, you have absolutely zero attachment, right? Like, oh, if he has 2 bad games, he's gone, right? Like, I could care less, right? Whereas if you have Markstrom, you're like, oh man, I don't want to give up on Markstrom. Like I drafted him in the 5th round or whatever. So yeah, sometimes it's easier mentally too that way.
Okay, well, great to hear that you're doing well. 4th out of 14, pretty good. Better than how I'm doing in my couple division this year. But I'm in a couple. I like to tell you because I like whine about this league, but I'm in a couple other leagues. I'm in 3, so I'm also like you. I don't want to be in too many. I've got 3 solid leagues. 2 of them I'm doing well in, so I should be happy. But of course, being a perfectionist, sometimes you want to do well in everything. But anyways, I still got a few more hot and cold streaks I want to get to. So we'll finish off the show here in just a sec with some more interesting players that you may want to check if they're available on your waiver wires. So we'll be right back. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay, final stretch.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, we are back in overtime, as we're calling it. So I guess the first episode, we had the first and second periods. We just did the third. We're still tied. So we're going to talk about some more hot and cold streaks here with Michael Amato from Goalie Post and Sportsnet, who you should definitely be following for like good fantasy tips all throughout the week. And also, if you're following Goalie Post, you get to find out all the goalie starts, which is very handy. But yeah, let's go back. Okay, I mentioned when I was going into the break that I'm going to talk about some guys that you may want to add, but I guess here's someone who probably isn't available in a lot of leagues, but it's still very interesting. Carter Verhaeghe really doing well on Florida right now. He has 10 points in his last 8 games, and he's not playing with Alex Barkov. Of course, now they have Matthew Tkachuk, who is like maybe almost just as good as playing with as Barkov, or maybe better. So yeah, this line of Verhaeghe, Tkachuk, and Sam Bennett have been doing really well together. And then also the other line of Barkov, Reinhart, and Anselm Lundell has been cruising, which makes things very interesting because word is that Anthony Duclair is going to be back post All-Star break. And if you recall last year, the Panthers had a lot of success with Barkov, Verhaeghe, and Duclair. So I'm wondering now if everything is going well for Florida and this top 6 is rolling. I guess Lundell is the most eligible for Duclair to just bump him. So is that what you think is going to happen, or do you think Duclair is going to come back and maybe have to spend some time in the bottom 6?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It feels like Florida was like tinkering all season trying to find the right combination. And as you said, I think like this has been the most optimal for them. Like Lundell's actually been playing pretty well since he moved up there. Like I think he's the last couple of games he didn't have a point, but he had like a good, I want to say like 4 or 5 game point streak before that. Maybe the biggest notable thing is like Sam Reinhart just sort of took off when they changed these lines to like he was had a pretty slow start to the season. And for the last sort of 12 or 13 games, like he's been really clicking at a good pace too. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what they do with Duclair. I think you're right. Lundell is probably the obvious switch because he could also like center the third line. Like he could play center too. He could just move down easily. But yeah, it's going so well right now. I wonder if they just don't mess with it because they had a lot of guys earlier in the year that were just kind of not producing anywhere close to what they did last year. And now there's a lot of them that are clicking really well. So we'll see what they do. But yeah, Declare would definitely be an interesting one to consider if he's still sitting on your fire right now.
Yeah, I think with Duclair, if you can grab him now, because word is he's going to be back after the All-Star break, grab him, stash him in your IR, but maybe like don't activate him. Like don't drop someone to activate him right away. You know, a lot of leagues like on Yahoo, you can just sort of leave the person in your IR, and as long as you don't make any ads. So I'd like wait a couple games if you can, see how things are shaking out. And then yeah, Lundell did have an assist in his last game, so he did break that short little like 2 game pointless streak. So yeah, it would be surprising to see him bumped, but also if Duclair does get up there, that could be really good for him. We've seen him be super valuable for stretches when he's playing with Barkov before, and obviously they have chemistry. Over in Minnesota, I want to go next. Let's go to a cold streak now. Sam Steele was someone who, for a while, I had been saying like, why is no one adding Sam Steele, who was super low percent rostered on Yahoo, but continuously putting up points and in such a good spot on that top line with Kaprizov and Zuccarello? But I guess he's shown me why people weren't clamoring to add him, because all of a sudden he's gone pointless in 6 games. I'd imagine he's starting to get dropped in a lot of leagues. So I guess the question is like, maybe we can say, hey, now's the time. You have your opportunity to get the sneaky ad of a top line player just happens to be cold. Or maybe Michael will say more like maybe now is the point where he's showing himself to be vulnerable to potentially finally being bumped from that top line. If you recall, Ryan Hartman was there last year and did really, really well. And then this year, Hartman wasn't able to stick. And Hartman actually recently was in trouble with his coach. He got scratched for a game because I guess he took a bad penalty or something. But who knows if maybe the coach feels like Hartman's not only learned enough from his scratch to get back in the lineup, but maybe to get another shot on the top line since Steele hasn't been producing lately.
Yeah, I am one of those people that need the answer to this question because I have Sam Steele and I've been debating what to do with him too for a couple of games. My main league that I have been counts faceoffs though, so he's a bit more valuable there because he's still producing well there, so I can kind of live without the points for a little bit, but not too much longer. Yeah, I was singing his praises too because I remember, like you said, he was really clicking and he was still like 2% owned for a long time. And yeah, I think anybody in that spot between Kaprizov and Zuccarello, you're going to want to have on your roster. Like, I can't imagine if he stays there, he's going to stay cold for long. I think the risk is at this point, you mentioned Hartman, no points in 6 games for Steele. How long are they going to wait? It's not like this is some like bona fide veteran on a super contract that they're not going to bump down the lineup. I think if he starts struggling, they could easily shift Steele down. But that line's been pretty good overall. So maybe they'll give another game or two. But yeah, I know they've tried a lot of different centermen with them earlier this year when Hartman was down. I think Frederick Boudreau was up there for a bit, so maybe go back to him. For some reason, they never put Joel Eriksson up with them, so I don't think he's going up. But yeah, Hartman could be a candidate as well. So it's interesting. I might give Steele like another game or two, and then yeah, if he's cold, you're in a points league, you might have to drop because yeah, I could see a change coming there.
Yeah, like you look at Kaprizov and you see, oh, he has 7 points in his last 5 games. He's cruising, so obviously everything's fine. But 6 of those points are on the power play, so things are going very well for Minnesota on the power play. But doesn't seem like things are happening at even strength. So maybe it is time for a switch up.
Yeah, it's definitely possible too. Like I could see Hartman, like maybe he gets that one last shot. He took his healthy scratch. Maybe they give him another chance there because yeah, he's been a guy that I know we talked earlier about Huberdeau and Kane being kind of busts, and I know Hartman's not on that level, but I think in multi-cat leagues he was kind of a darling for just like he got 30 goals last year and 60 points, and he's great on faceoffs and hits and penalty minutes, and this year with the injury, and he's I think he's got only like one. It's been pretty rough to roster, so maybe that's sort of his last chance to salvage a season.
Yeah, so something for people to definitely watch, and if Hartman's available to you, and if again, there's a lot of like ifs, but just keep an eye out. And who knows, maybe also Minnesota tries to trade for a center at the deadline. They could definitely use one. I'm looking at like the available UFA, like pending UFA centers. I guess the biggest name is Bo Horvat. That would be so crazy huge. I don't know if that's in the cards, but I'm already like imagining because of the Canucks. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be incredible. Like it's funny because when people talk about Horvat, they're always like, "Oh, he'd be a great fit on this team. Like he'd be a great fit on any team, right? Like a center, he could pretty much play on and like anywhere in the top 6. Like he's so talented. Yeah, Minnesota obviously be will really benefit from that. Would really bump up their team quite a bit.
Yeah, and like I feel like a lot of these trades that happen at the deadline, I think it's important to start priming for this. Like a lot of people get really excited about any player that gets traded and starts like jumping on them, but like like history has shown that usually like these players that get traded at the deadline don't like improve in their fantasy value for the most part, and sometimes even go down. It's like a new situation; they have to build chemistry. But I think anyone who gets traded to Minnesota who's a center, you need to jump on right away because that's just such a plum spot. Like Sam Steele, like was barely getting ice time on Anaheim, and now he was like half point per game, even like more than that first stretch. Like like Jonathan Taves, for example. Imagine if they even get him, like that would probably boost him. My dog is like, one second. My dog is like somehow in the room. I don't know how she got here. I'm just gonna let her out. She's scratching the door. Sorry. So actually, I have two possible segues I want to use now. I could stay on Minnesota, or I could go to another unheralded center who's now somewhat become interesting on a different team. But okay, I'll stick on Minnesota first. Matt Boldy. I talked about how Kaprizov has all these points in the power play recently. Matt Boldy's been there as well, and he's joining in. He has 7 points in his last 5 games. I need you to like slap me across the face, basically, Michael, because like going into the season in my keeper league, I kept Evgeny Kuznetsov and let Matt Boldy go back into the draft. It was like a keep 8. So I figured, like Boldy obviously in a dynasty league is like, you want to hold him for sure. But I figured like, okay, it's only year 2, Fiala's gone. Like who's Boldy even going to play with? Like how good could he really be compared to like a Kuznetsov? And now I'm like really kicking myself. I just want to know how badly did I blow this one? Keeping a guy who now like is hard to roster even versus a Boldy who might be a superstar for like years to come.
Yeah, should have kept them. Should have kept them. I'll say with my my hindsight is 2020. Yeah, you never know. Like it's hard to predict with some of those guys, especially Boldy, kind of like not super experienced yet. It would be easy for him to. And I think we saw with like Lucas Raymond kind of going on a bit of a slide this year. You wondered if Boldy might go on a similar route, but yeah, he looks really good. And I think the Wild kind of locking him up to that contract was probably pretty smart too, because it feels like um, he could have probably got obviously really early, but like it feels like they just wanted to be proactive and get him locked in at a reasonable number with the cap going up, because they probably project he's going to be a pretty elite player. So yeah, he looks really good right now, but he's probably his best seasons are still probably a couple years away. But yeah, I would probably rather have Boldy than Kuznetsov right now, even though like, without Backstrom this year, I could see the logic. Like Kuznetsov was going to play with Ovechkin, and it seemed like a really good option there. But yeah, I just and Kuznetsov was coming off a really strong year too, so like I could see the logic here. But yeah, somehow Boldy playing with like Marcus Foligno and Frederick Boudreau lately is kind of obviously taking advantage of some power play points, but yeah, he seems to produce kind of wherever they put him in the lineup, so he looks really good.
Yeah, and obviously that top power play is turning into like a super plum spot, one of the best in the league. Somehow Kalen Addison is there and is like the only person on that power play who doesn't seem to be worth rostering in fantasy. I guess he just very quickly dishes it to someone, and then usually a couple more people touch the puck before they put it in the net. Like he has what in this stretch where this is actually crazy. Like where why am I blanking here? Oh yeah, stretch where Kaprizov has 6 power play points. I'm seeing that Addison has 1 power play point. Like he's the guy. He's right there. He's like supposed to start the play. So I guess it's just I need to watch more Minnesota Wild games, I guess, to see how this power play is actually shaking out for how he gets so few points. But okay, the center I wanted to talk about on a different team who's starting to break out a little bit is Cody Glass over in Nashville. All of a sudden, he's the latest guy on Nashville to get a shot on the top line with Forsberg and Duchesne. We've seen Parson in there. We've seen this guy Thomas Novak there. But now it's Cody Glass. He's been there for a few games now, and it's looking pretty good. It looked good for those other guys though also, so I don't want to say this is a sure thing, but like Glass is someone with a really high pedigree. He was drafted in the first round way back by Vegas. He now has 4 points in his last 3 games. He had 7 shots in the game versus Winnipeg. So I don't know, like maybe in the same conversation as like a Tolvanen type, like is Cody Glass someone that you're interested in and you've been rushing to take a chance on, take a flyer on, or do you think this is for sure something that's not going to last and you'd rather go for someone with higher upside?
Yeah, I can't say I've been rushing to add him, but he's definitely interesting. like you said, they've been trying a lot of different options there, and everyone looked great at the beginning, and they've kind of fallen off. And I just think with Nashville, in general, like they had so many guys last season that just like everything went right for and everything went in, and everyone had sort of like inflated shooting percentages. And I think now like they've just all come back down to earth quite a bit. So I don't think somebody like Glass is probably a long term ad, but yeah, like a stream, like in the Tolvanen vein, sure. He's clicking right now. Why not risk it? Especially if that shot total he can keep somewhere around there. That's pretty good volume.
Yeah. So I want to give people, some options. Hard to say which ones will hit, but at least one of these lower rostered guys. I guess Kirill Marchenko was another one we mentioned earlier. Someone you're going to end up thinking back and like, oh man, Keeping Karlsson told me with Michael told me to get this guy. Of course, and you'll hopefully just forget all the guys that we mentioned that ended up not doing much of anything. We're just reporters here. We're telling you who's hot at the moment. I should also mention Tanner Jeannot on Nashville has goals in 2 straight. Generally, he's been like a lot of people were drafting him, expecting him to score as much as he did last year. It was a very inflated shooting percentage. He's crashed hard a little bit, like which you can't expect a third line guy like him to produce that much. But hey, goals in 2 straight. So I guess I've kind of tipped my hand on my opinion. But do you think there's a chance he can get back to his 2021-22 ways in the second half of the year?
No, I don't think he gets back to anywhere close than that. Yeah, I think obviously in leagues that count hits, like he was a trendy pick for sure. Just for the all last year, but yeah, a lot of people are calling him like the poor man's Brady Tkachuk there for a while, but yeah, doesn't.
Yeah, I mean Brady Tkachuk gets a bit better deployment and is also a bit of a higher pedigree for sure. I don't know. Like, I guess I should mention this Logan Couture. I already have a question here, and it killed me. I told you I wouldn't talk about this anymore. But Couture, what a game, right? 2 goals, 3 assists in the 6-4 win over Pittsburgh. He's another guy that might be available at the trade deadline, right? If the Sharks decide to sell, that would be a good spot for him. Also on Minnesota with Kaprizov and Zuccarello. Anyway, I don't know. Like, what do we do at this point? Let's say the Sharks don't move Couture, because I don't think he's the main name that people are talking about is like Timo Meier, right? Because he's a UFA, or even like Erik Karlsson. People have been talking about, even though he still has a lot of years left. Maybe now's a good time to try to sell and get out of that contract while he's like one of the best D in the league still. But like, do you think that now, if you have Logan Couture, is this like the perfect time going into the All-Star break for you to try to like pawn him off in your fantasy league, coming off a huge game? Potentially the Sharks will move Timo Meier. Can't imagine Couture is going to have a lot of great guys to play with once the trade deadline is over.
Is a smart time to try and see what you can get for him. Yeah, he doesn't have like a super high ceiling either, right? Like, I kind of view him as just like a very, exactly what you're going to get from him every year. So yeah, he's kind of going better, like the way he is sort of lately. It's probably a good time to move him because yeah, like you got to think Meyer is going to be dealt, right? I thought I heard they were even going to allow teams to talk to him about an extension like before they traded for him. So that kind of tells you he's probably gone. You never know 100%, but yeah, I would imagine if you can get something pretty good for right now, it's probably a good bet to do.
Yeah, so someone to see. Obviously, like don't give him away for peanuts, but Couture's also been someone that has like crashed hard in previous years in fantasy. I remember it was a couple seasons ago where he had like almost point per game in the first half and then totally disappeared. I think it came out that he had an injury, so maybe that's not going to be the same situation here. Hopefully, he's like fully healthy. He definitely seemed healthy in that game versus Pittsburgh, though it was against Casey DeSmith, who is quickly proving to be a very unreliable goalie for the Pens. But yeah, Couture. Probably, yeah. I think now is like a key, like maybe it's like too obvious almost as a sell high, but maybe you like throw him in as a add-in on an already big trade to put it over the top. I don't know. I'd be interested. Like tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson or tweet at Amato_Mike with your Logan Couture trades. I think it would be interesting to try to move him at this point. Another hot streak of a guy that might be available to you in your fantasy leagues. Actually, I'll throw a couple at you here just to move things along. On the Rangers, Philip Hedl is really on a bender right now on this, kid line with Lafreniere and Kakko. And Hedl's the one that's scoring the goals. That makes him the most interesting. And he's now got like 5 points in his last 3 games, and 4 of them are goals. So I'd be curious to know if you think there's any chance this is sustainable. He's still only 23 years old, not getting like the best deployment, like second power play, but someone that has a somewhat high pedigree, right? Like people always talk about Laff and Kakko with their like first and second overall draft stocks, but Hedl's a first round pick also. 21st overall, but still there's been a lot of great players that have gone there. And then I guess another former first round pick that's hot right now is Max Domi over in Chicago, who he's like really interesting right now because he's on a 5-game point streak, but he hasn't been playing with Patrick Kane. Like they Chicago in the last couple of games moved Kane with Jason Dickinson as his center. And I saw a quote from Patrick Kane after the last game where they got destroyed by Edmonton, but I guess he still was in a good mood because he was saying how he's like really enjoying playing with Jason Dickinson, and like Dickinson is like opening up room for him. I don't remember the exact quote, but something about how he likes how Dickinson's like, I guess, like whatever, taking care of the center of the ice. So Kane, and all that to say, Domi, even with his hot streak, it's like how good, like it's hard to imagine he'll be able to keep this up if he's not playing with Patrick King, because there's not really anyone else to play with. But at the same time, he's on the power play. So yeah, maybe we could even compare them, like a Philip Hedl or a Max Domi. Hot, both on hot streaks in different situations, maybe not with the best line mates. Are either of them interesting to you right now?
Definitely Hedel is interesting. I wrote about him this morning in my column. Actually, I kind of identified him as maybe a target because again, he's got the good schedule. I think the Rangers got 4 games. Like sort of in the second week of the next matchup. I think I kind of had him and not to get sidetracked, but like Adam Henrique too in a similar vein. Again, good schedule. He's been on a really good run too. But yeah, I like Hedel a lot. I think he's a good option in the short term. You know, he's really clicking right now. He's still, second power play unit. It's not the worst, but at least it's something there for him. That second line for the Rangers actually been playing pretty well lately overall. So I like his options there. And like I said, great schedule. So I'd probably take a chance on him if you need somebody coming up here. And I think he's very low roster too. I want to see it was like 13% or 17% Yahoo, something like that. Quite low. And yeah, Domi, another interesting one. Probably I don't like him as much as Hedel just because, as you said, who's he really going to play with in Chicago? Maybe if you're in a multi-cat league, he's a little bit more appealing. I think he had the old like 17 minutes and penalties the other night, which can always swing a category for you sometimes. I think he is also maybe three forward position eligible, if I'm not mistaken, in Yahoo, which is always a benefit. So yeah, he's got some things like that. I think maybe that goal for him as well. Dolan, if you're looking for a little bit more category coverage, he might be an option too.
Yeah, okay. So Hedel first, but Domi maybe potentially, and who knows? Like Chicago could always change their lines back, though. It seems like Kane likes playing with Dickinson, like I said. Okay, let's end with just a couple cold streaks here of some guys. Maybe you can let people know if like they should be nervous or if they should just chill, enjoy the All-Star break, and these guys will bounce back afterwards. I guess we have to start in Montreal with Nick Suzuki, who just continues to do like absolutely nothing. It's definitely getting concerning. His line mates have been one of the guys you were asked about, Josh Anderson, and Rem Pitlick. And it's like pointless in 3, but then he had an assist versus Toronto before that, pointless in 2. So it's basically like 1 point in his last 6 games. His line mates look terrible. Montreal looks terrible. Like they couldn't score against Ottawa. Like, I don't know. Like, is he someone that you just have to grin and bear it and just like hold him for the rest of the year because he's Nick Suzuki and he could potentially get hot at any time? Or would he actually be someone that you would consider dropping for like, one of these guys, I don't know, like a Cody Glass or, like obviously a streaming spot where you're just like going for the next hot thing? Like, is Nick Suzuki approaching that territory where you have to consider letting him go, or would you just hold him?
I would say if you are in a non-keeper league, like a 1-year league, and yeah, like we mentioned earlier, you're kind of on the fringe of the playoffs and you're desperate. Yeah, I think you could consider it just because without Cole Caulfield there, I don't really see a path forward where Suzuki's going to really return to anything like we used to from him this season. It's funny because like Kirby Dach actually got moved to another line as well, and he's actually been pretty steady lately, surprisingly. So I thought he would fall off too, but he hasn't really fallen off like Suzuki has, because those two are really clicking. That line of Caulfield, Dach, and Suzuki is really playing well. So yeah, I think like it's been, like you said, Montreal's really bad. They're not looking great. Desperate times call for desperate measures. If you're fighting for your life in your league, you might have to make a move and take a chance on someone.
Yeah, it's been rough, and yeah, with Caulfield out for the season, it doesn't seem like there's any like reinforcements coming in or any reason to think that things can get a lot better. Like Suzuki's just gonna have to, like, maybe if he could, honestly, it's like Dach is playing with Hoffman and Dodonov, who really like aren't players that have moved the needle for a while. But at this point, like I as someone with Suzuki, I wish that I could have those line mates instead of Anderson and Rem Pitlick. But I guess either way, it's going to be tough for anyone to like produce sustainably on Montreal. So I think I'm with you that maybe it's going to be time to move on soon, if not already,
Yeah.
because Montreal, another one of those weak schedules. They play once next week against Ottawa. So maybe they'll get shut out by Anton Forsberg again. And then they're going to have to wait all the way till the following Saturday. So it's really worth it holding Nick Suzuki just for that.
Yeah.
Another cold streak of a guy who generally has been like given reason to be more worthy of waiting on is Travis Konechny, who just like I mean I just have to bring him up because we were drooling over him a few episodes ago, talking about how he's been one of the biggest surprises of the season. Like anyone, we looked at some stats in the cupful, and it was like anyone who's drafted Konechny like is like has a very high chance of being in a playoff spot currently, just because you got such great value with such a low pick. And all of a sudden, I almost like maybe since we talked about him, I hope I didn't jinx him, but yeah, he's pointless in 4 games. I think it's probably just a blip, but I wanted to ask an expert opinion here. Like, is there any reason to be nervous about Konechny? Was he like overperforming and now he's like hitting a wall, or do you think this is fine? Like after the All-Star break, he'll get back to being the point per game guy that he was before.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I think like he's actually, yeah, like you said, really good value given I think how most people thought the Flyers were going to end up this year, and I don't think they're great, but I think they've actually had a lot of fantasy relevant players, which has surprised me a little bit. So I think Konechny will probably get back on track here. And again, I think he's potentially also one of those players that could be moved at the deadline. That maybe gets a boost if he ends up with somewhere. I've kind of heard his name kind of here and there, but I don't. Again, who knows if it's actually going to happen? But there's the small upside there. But yeah, I'm not too overly concerned with him.
Man, like I don't know, like if Philly trades Konechny, that'd be like wild. Like he's like their best player. It seems like he still has 3 more years left on a pretty reasonable contract. That would really be signaling that we're just like gonna tank for a while.
Like, yeah, again, I don't know if it's going to happen, but yeah, if they are going to go in that direction, like, I don't know how many people would be safe on that roster. Like, there's not a lot of talent there, right? And, if you have a chance, I guess, to get Bedard, this is probably the year, you're going to want to go all in on tanking. Like, you're definitely not going to want to be like next year, you know what? Yeah, we should probably tank now. Like, if you're even thinking it's going to come to that, like, this is probably the year to do it. So,
yeah, no, it's a good point. Though right now Carter Hart is not helping them get Bedard because he just had a really awesome game versus Winnipeg. So yeah, Hart. I guess overall he's also had a couple of bad games recently. Like he obviously doesn't get a lot of support there, but it's pretty impressive what he's been able to do. I'd love to see one day Hart play on a different team, either an improved Philly team or just a different team. Kind of like John Gibson. I'd like to see what he could do on a good team. Melka is another one. I feel like he could be really awesome if he got an opportunity on a good team. So I don't know. Maybe
that's what goalies. Yeah, you don't want a good goalie when you're trying to tank. That's for sure. I remember the Leafs had to trade Reimer the year they were trying to get Matthews because he was just playing mini games for them, so they ended up trading him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think Philly's going to trade Carter Hart. But yeah, it's definitely not ideal when you're trying to lose games.
Yeah, they could just tell him, hey, don't you think you have a bit of like a tweak? Maybe you should sit. Maybe you should go on LTIR. I don't know. Want to get
we're gonna give
surgery.
Sandstrom look here for 10 games.
Yeah, though Ersson was actually doing pretty good. They'd have to also they'd have to figure out a way to get him out of the picture too. So
yeah.
Okay, yeah. One last hot streak. Oh no, two more hot. Or sorry. Okay, a couple more cold streaks to finish this things off here. This one I think might be pretty easy, but I just wanted to get it on record here. David Perron has like just been doing nothing for a while now on Detroit. This was like a high pedigree, well, like a free agent signing. Like it was looking like he could fit in really well, play with Larkin potentially. He's coming off a 70-point pace season with St. Louis and 85-point pace season the year before. So it was looking really good there. But yeah, now he's pointless in 5. His deployment has been shaky. He's not shooting too much. It would be really hard for me to be holding on to David Perron right now. I know Brian dropped him in his couple divisions. So I just want to know if you have any reason to believe he'll be worth holding or if he's a safe drop for now.
Yeah, I can't say he's worth holding. He's definitely like been a bit of a disappointment because you mentioned the point paces. If you actually, I remember looking at him in the preseason when I was doing my rankings. Like if you go back 6 years, like he's had crazy point paces for like the last 6 years, like really good. And every year I kind of don't look at him as like a super valuable guy. And then I look at his point paces and I'm like, oh man, he's a really strong player for fantasy. And then of course this year, one year I think everyone started believing the hype in him, and he goes to Detroit and they have kind of like looks like a really potent top 6. Yeah, he just kind of seemed to fallen off, and maybe it's just his age is catching up with him a little bit too. But Yeah, I don't know. Some of those Detroit players this year have really run hot and cold. I know Raymond was really struggling early in the year. He's picked it up lately. Cider was like almost non-existent for the first couple months. So yeah, I think it's just sort of concerned to kind of fall into that kind of downspin, but he's definitely not one like the others that you're going to want to hang on to. So there are options out there. Yeah, it's like
Yeah, so maybe like obviously if you drop Perron, like watch him. You could always try to get him back, but I don't think people are going to be clamoring for him. And then maybe the last one, which is maybe the most interesting. What did people do with Eric Gustafsson over in Washington? He was like so hot for a long stretch and looking like a league-winning free agent ad after John Carlson got injured, and then all of a sudden he's been still on the top power play. Like today, he played 4 minutes and 20 seconds on the power play for Washington, but he didn't get a point. Washington got creamed by Toronto 5-1, and now that's what is this here? Like only 1 assist in his last 7 games, like 2 assists in his last 9 games. Like it's really just been nothing for Eric Gustafsson. But he's, it's hard to recommend dropping someone in such a good spot. But let's say if you have, like we talked about Jake Sanderson earlier on, or I talked about like Owen Power with Jeremy on the previous episode, like some of these like second power play guys who are starting to produce, maybe have a higher pedigree. Like I'm just curious to know, is like, I could definitely see an argument that Eric Gustafsson is just someone you have to hold while he's on the top power play because the upside is always there, but he also is Eric Gustafsson, and he's definitely not generally been someone that you need to hold in any league ever since he had that one good year in Chicago.
Yeah, like I probably got more questions about him than any other player this week for the mailbag. Just should I drop him? Can I drop him now? Tell me I can drop him. But I think,
Please.
yeah, like you said, he's in a great spot. Like, and Carlson's not going to be back anytime soon, right? So you got to figure he's going to come out of it at some point. But yeah, he's just really been struggling, and I think that's what concerns me. Like you mentioned, he's only had the really one strong offensive season, so it's not like there's a huge body of work you can look back on to say you got to hold this guy. But yeah, what a tear he went on earlier in the year. So I don't know. Maybe I'd give him like a couple more games just to see if he can get going. But yeah, he's definitely wading into that drop.
Yeah, I think I might just go and re-record some audio and drop it into some episodes from like a month ago, just being like, now would be a really great time to try to trade Eric Gustafsson while he's on this. I wish I said that, right? I would have sounded really smart, but I'm pretty sure I was just saying like, hang on and be happy because he's in such a good spot. But yeah, he's totally disappeared. But yeah, it would be hard for me to drop him at this point, especially if you're doing well, right? And even if you're not, like, I just feel like, who are you dropping him for? Like,
Yeah,
I am into Jake Sanderson. I don't know, maybe that's something to consider, but you have a lot higher upside with Gustafsson for sure on the top power play. Okay, so Mike, this has been so fun. The time has flown by, but I guess we've gone through the whole long list of topics that I wanted to discuss. Clearly, everyone realizes that you're an expert in fantasy. Like, hopefully they already know about your work from before just listening to this episode. But for those that aren't following everything you do, you want to just let people know how they can keep up?
yeah, for sure. Just follow me on Twitter at Amato_Mike. And yeah, check out Goalie Post for your starting goalie needs. And you can always read my work at Sportsnet. Fantasy Hockey Mailbag comes out Friday, and 20 Fantasy Thoughts on Sunday.
And if people want to like ask you questions for the mailbag, I guess just tweet at you at Amato Mike.
Yep, that's it. I usually throw a tweet out there Wednesday asking for questions. You can always respond, ask any questions. And yeah, I do a Saturday Q&A as well all season, where you can just ask me questions about your team in general, or what you want to start, sit for the weekends. Any questions really, I'm always available.
Yeah, well, it says right on your Twitter profile that you care about people's fantasy teams. So clearly you're just here to help.
Probably too much, but yes, I do.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being here. This has been such a fun episode. I'm sure the listeners are really going to enjoy it. For everyone listening, obviously, we appreciate you tuning into another episode of Keeping Karlsson. Thanks to, I guess I'll read these credits that Brian usually reads. So I guess I'll cue the outro music. Okay, so that's playing right now. Thanks to Kevin A. Bear for all the great work he's doing running our Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. Thanks to Shams for all the great work he's been doing on GameDayTweets.com, retweeting up a storm. Lewis came up with a nickname for Shams, but now let's see if I can find that super quickly without getting too boring. Okay, give me like 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. Okay, it was the... Oh, I didn't get it in time. Sorry, I'm gonna get this so fast. Oh yeah, was the rock star of the retweet. is something I think Lewis is going to try out soon on an upcoming show. So for whatever that's worth, he's doing amazing work. Definitely check out brandonweeb.com. They made our logos. Our outro music is by Pat Roach. And obviously, like Michael Amato said, just check out his great work. Follow him on Twitter. Go to Goalie Post. Read his articles on Sportsnet. Thank you so much again, Michael. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back with some more content this week. We've got short shifts coming up. And then we're going to do, Brian and I have a special plan for the mega show next Sunday because there's not going to be a lot of action to discuss. And we're definitely not going to be doing a deep dive into the All-Star game. Mike, do you have plans to do any fantasy analysis for the All-Star game and impacts of who did well and who didn't?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I don't even know if I'm going to watch it. I'll be too busy looking forward to my future fantasy week. So yeah, thanks again. See you, everyone. And I guess while you're enjoying the All-Star break, remember to try to do your best to make it that fantasy hockey is for everyone. Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun.
Yeah, you're such an amazing guest. We'd love to, it was definitely a pleasure. We'd love to have you back sometime. Okay. Awesome. Well, awesome. Yeah, have a great rest of your night. Good luck with
you too.
Your young one.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you as well. If you tag me, are you putting this out tomorrow, I guess? Or?
Yeah, I'll do late tonight, and then I'll tweet about it, I guess, tomorrow morning. So yeah, I'll just tag you for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I can share it on the DP platform of my as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay,
cool.
Have a great night.
All right, take care. Thanks again.
And thanks everyone in the chat. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. See ya.